I'm Claire Whitman, 31 years old, and when the lawyer handed my sister a check for $10 million, my parents turned to me and said, "Go earn your own." I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I stared at the polished wood table, pretending I couldn't hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then the lawyer unfolded a second envelope, one with my grandfather's handwriting. My mother's smile vanished. My father's fingers curled against the chair. That envelope would unravel everything. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been left out by the people who were supposed to protect you. I grew up just outside Charleston, South Carolina, in a house where silence said more than words ever could. My parents, Betty and Carl, believed in appearances, that if you kept your lawn trimmed and your smile polite, the rest didn't matter. My older sister Vanessa always knew how to shine in that world. She danced, smiled on cue, made straight A's in subjects she barely studied. I was the quiet one, the one who took things apart just to understand how they worked, who asked questions no one wanted to answer. But there was one person who saw me, my grandfather Walter. He owned a small ranch at the edge of town with fields that stretched toward the magnolia trees and a porch that smelled like sun tea and cedar. I spent every summer there. He listened when I talked, even when the topic was bees or water cycles, or why I thought plants might remember light patterns. While my parents dismissed it as nonsense, Grandpa pulled up a stool and told me to explain it again. He called it curiosity. My mother called it being difficult. After college, I stayed up north for work, a research assistant job, modest pay, long hours, and barely enough to cover rent. I missed the ranch. I missed Grandpa. But every time I tried to come home, something got in the way. Vanessa would say they were busy. My parents stopped picking up my calls. When I showed up one March, the front door never opened. Still, I kept sending letters to Grandpa. I mailed him journals, my notes, even a photograph of the small research lab I shared at the university. I didn't know then that he was already sick. I found out about his passing through a 2-sentence email from my mother. No details, no warmth. Just the date of the funeral and the address. When I showed up that morning, the church parking lot was empty. The funeral had already happened 3 hours earlier. And I stood there in the quiet in a dress I hadn't worn in years, not knowing what to do with the grief that hadn't been given a place. I thought that was the end of it. But at the will reading, when they handed Vanessa the check and dismissed me with a shrug, the lawyer hesitated. He reached into his case and pulled out something none of them expected, a letter sealed in a faded envelope addressed in my grandfather's handwriting. My grandmother's face went pale when she saw it. My parents looked like they'd been slapped. That letter led me back to the ranch, the place I hadn't seen in over a year. And as I stepped out of the car, the wind chimes on the porch rattled in the breeze, but they didn't sound like comfort anymore. They sounded like something waiting or warning. I walked up the steps, unsure if I should knock. Then the door opened, and there she was. "So you finally decided to show up," my grandmother said. Her arms were crossed, her face unreadable. I stood there not knowing if I should speak or turn away. And that's where everything began. Again. My grandmother didn't step aside. She didn't open her arms or ask how I'd been. She just looked at me with something cold behind her eyes. The porch creaked under my feet as I stood there, unsure if I should say anything at all. "What happened?" I asked quietly. "Why didn't anyone tell me he was sick?" She didn't answer right away. Her arms stayed crossed, her mouth set tight. When she finally spoke, her voice was sharper than I remembered. "They told me you were too busy," she said. "Said you didn't want to be bothered, that you had a new life now." I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Her eyes didn't soften. They held steady. "Your grandfather called for you every day near the end," she went on. "Asked if you were coming. I kept saying you'd show. I believed it." I stepped forward, heart thudding. I tried. I really did. I came by in March. Vanessa answered the door. She said nobody was home. Her face flickered. A tight crease formed between her brows. "We were here," she said. "We were always here." She didn't wait for my response. She turned and walked back into the house, leaving the door open behind her. I followed slowly. The air inside felt still, almost too thick to breathe. The curtains were the same, the worn rug, the low hum of the refrigerator, but it didn't feel like the place I remembered. She returned holding a small leather notepad, worn edges, faded ink. She handed it to me. "This was the number he kept calling," she said. I looked at the page. Blocky handwriting I knew by heart. But the number wasn't mine, not even close. "This isn't me," I said. "I've had the same number since college." She stared down at it like the truth was just now reaching her. "They said you changed it, that you didn't want to be tracked down, that you were ashamed of us." I leaned against the wall, needing something solid. "They lied to you," I said. "They made sure I couldn't reach him. They cut me off." Her hands trembled. She sat down slowly in the armchair by the fireplace like her legs couldn't hold her anymore. She looked up at me again. "They told everyone the funeral was at noon," I whispered. "I got to the church, and it was empty." Her mouth tightened. "The funeral was at 9, she said softly. "They said you didn't come, that you didn't care." I sank onto the couch, my body suddenly too heavy. I would have never missed it. Never. We sat there, the silence pressing in. The old clock ticked louder than I remembered. Outside, dry leaves scraped across the porch like something unsettled. She reached for my hand and held it in hers. Her grip wasn't strong, but it was steady. "We know the truth now," she said. "That's what matters. We know." She stood after a while, slower than before, but her shoulders squared like something inside her had settled. "I'm calling them," she said. "Calling who?" She didn't answer right away. She walked to the old rotary phone on the kitchen wall. Grandpa had refused to replace it, said it still worked just fine. She picked it up and started dialing, her fingers slow but firm. Each turn of the dial felt final. When the line picked up, her voice was clipped. "Betty, I need you, Jacob and Vanessa here. Now." There was something muffled on the other end, but she didn't give it room. "No, it can't wait. Be here in an hour." She hung up, turned toward me. "The lawyer's on his way too. Grandpa's lawyer," I asked. She nodded. "Your grandfather left some things behind, said they had to be read in front of all of us. No exceptions." I didn't ask anything else. I just nodded. I stayed in the kitchen while she moved around the house, straightening things that didn't need it wiping down the same patch of counter 3 times. I sat at the kitchen table and ran my finger along the edge. I remembered him sitting right there with his morning coffee, reading the journals I sent him from college. The same table where I once told him I wanted to study plant memory, and instead of laughing, he asked what I needed. I closed my eyes and listened to the house breathe. When the doorbell rang, Grandma placed a hand on my shoulder. "Stay here," she said. "I'll call you when it's time." I stayed seated while the sounds of arrival drifted in. My mother's too sweet voice, my father's measured calm, Vanessa's sigh sharp and impatient. Then silence. Grandma's voice came next, low, firm, colder than I'd ever heard it. "Please sit down. Mr. Harold Keene is on his way. He'll be reading Walter's final instructions." I imagined their faces, confused, irritated, maybe curious. They didn't know I was here. They didn't know what was coming. But neither did I. Still, some part of me hoped that maybe just once someone would speak the truth. That all those years of being ignored and pushed aside hadn't just been misunderstandings. That someone might finally say out loud what I'd always felt. The front door creaked again. A new voice joined the room, steady, professional. "This won't take long," the lawyer said. "But it must be done properly." Grandma's voice called back to me. "Claire, come in now." I stood. My hands were cold, my chest tight. I walked through the kitchen doorway into the living room. 3 heads turned. My mother's smile froze. My father's jaw locked. Vanessa went pale. They didn't just look surprised. They looked afraid. I kept my back straight as I walked across the living room and sat down in the empty armchair across from them. My mother didn't speak. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. Vanessa's arms were crossed so tightly across her chest, her knuckles had gone white. The lawyer gave me a polite nod, then opened a thick manila envelope from his briefcase. "This," he said, "is the final will and testament of Walter R. Whitman." No one moved. He started with Grandma. She barely blinked when he said her name. "To Margaret Whitman, I leave our family ranch, the house, and sufficient funds for her comfort and care." Then he turned the page. "To my granddaughter, Claire Whitman." The room changed. My mother's hands stiffened. My father glanced at Vanessa, who didn't look away from the lawyer, but her jaw had tightened. I leave the Whitman Research Annex, he read, located at 317 Laurel Creek Road, Charleston, including all laboratory equipment funding accounts, active research patents, and intellectual property currently filed under Whitman Innovation. There was a sound short, sharp, a gasp, not mine. Vanessa sat up straighter. My mother's eyes flicked down. My father shifted in his seat, but no one said a word. And finally the lawyer continued, the remainder of my estate, financial holdings, stocks, and retirement accounts shall be divided equally between my two granddaughters, Claire and Vanessa Whitman. That was the spark. Vanessa stood abruptly. Her chair scraped hard against the floor. What she said, her voice rising. You gave her the annex, the entire facility. She turned to our parents, her voice cracking. You said it would all be mine. You said if I just kept showing up, if I smiled and stayed close, that everything would come to me. Neither of them responded. My father's jaw twitched, but he stayed quiet. My mother still wouldn't look at me. The lawyer raised a hand gently. There's one more document, he said. A letter written to Claire to be read aloud in this room. Vanessa gave a short, bitter laugh. No one joined her. Grandma stood and walked to the side table. She opened the drawer, pulled out a folded sheet of paper, and handed it to the lawyer. He wrote that the week before he passed, she said quietly, made me promise it would be read with everyone present. The lawyer unfolded it carefully. The handwriting filled the page, broad strokes unmistakably his. To my dearest Claire, he began. The room stilled. If this is being read, then I'm no longer beside you. But I want you to know my belief in you has never wavered. I didn't look at anyone. I focused on the carpet beneath the coffee table. I listened. You were always the quiet one, the one who asked why when others stopped at what. You built your own truth in a family that never learned how to hold it. Vanessa sat back down. My mother shifted in her seat. I kept still. You were never a mistake, the lawyer read. You were the legacy I was proudest of. I felt my chest tighten, my hands folded in my lap, unmoving. I saw the way you carried that little notebook at 7, tracking how long it took raindrops to fill a glass, the way your face lit up when you noticed patterns in the ordinary, and I saw how that light began to dim each time your voice was brushed aside. No one interrupted. The only sound was the wind brushing dry leaves against the porch. You glowed in ways they couldn't understand, he read, and instead of learning your language, they shut you out. I stayed still. Vanessa's arms dropped to her sides. She looked down at her lap. I don't blame them entirely, the letter went on. They played the roles they were taught. But you, Claire, you wrote your own. And that takes more courage than they'll ever know. Tears threatened at the edges of my vision, but I didn't wipe them away. I remember when you won that first science fair and asked me to hide the trophy. You said, maybe if I don't show it, they'll stop looking at me like I'm someone else's kid. Across the room, I heard a shaky breath. Maybe from my father. Maybe not. You deserved to be celebrated, not erased. The lawyer paused, then folded the letter back up with quiet hands. The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt full, like something had finally settled where it belonged. I cleared my throat. I remember that science fair, I said, my voice low. Mom didn't come. She was at Vanessa's dress rehearsal. Vanessa flinched. I came home holding that trophy like I was carrying a secret, I said. My father finally spoke. Claire, this isn't the time to revisit the past. No, I said. It's the only time. Because every time I tried to be proud of something, all I ever heard was, why can't you be more like your sister? I turned to Vanessa. And from you, every time I did something good, you treated it like a threat. She scoffed. You always made yourself the victim. I worked for what I got. I nodded slightly. You showed up when it served you. You smiled when you were told to. You said the right things because you thought it would pay off. Vanessa's voice sharpened. And what you think you're perfect, you disappeared. No, I said. I was shut out. You gave Grandpa the wrong number, told Grandma I didn't want to come. That's not distance. That's removal. My mother stood. Enough, Claire. You're twisting this. This family has been through a lot. This family, Grandma, cut in her voice steady, has lived in denial. And I let it happen for far too long. My mother turned to her stunned. Mother, I watched you ignore Claire's pain. I believed you when you said she didn't care, but I should have known better. My father shifted in his seat. Look, Claire got her education, her programs, her travel. That wasn't free. No, I said. But you didn't pay for it. Grandpa did. Every cent. Every grant he helped me find. Every plane ticket. You didn't even know where I was half the time. My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. You made me feel like a burden. He made me feel like I mattered. Vanessa stood again. This is ridiculous. I was told I'd get everything. I stayed. I was the one who was here. I looked at her calmly. You were the performer, the one they chose. I was the one they forgot. But Grandpa didn't. And now you don't get to erase me anymore. Vanessa's face twisted. Why should you get anything? Just because you're a sad little genius with a microscope, I didn't move. No, I got something because I was loved. That's what you never understood. Love isn't something you win, it's something you give. Grandma rose slowly. She walked to the center of the room and faced Vanessa. I regret that Walter left you anything, she said, because what you gave him wasn't love. It was obligation. She looked at all three of them. You need to leave. My mother gasped. You can't be serious. Out, Grandma said. Now. They didn't move right away, but then Vanessa grabbed her purse and walked out her heels, hitting the wood floor like hammers. My parents followed, muttering about lawyers and rights. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Not loud, just final. I stayed seated. Grandma moved past me, her shoulders straight. They'll be back, I said softly. They always come back. She sat on the sofa, folded her hands in her lap. Maybe, she said, but this time we don't have to open the door. And for the first time, the house felt quiet in a different way. Not abandoned, just free. Next time I'll tell you what I found at Laurel Creek Road and what my grandfather built when no one else was watching. The house stayed still after they left. No raised voices behind the door. No more chairs scraping across the floor. Just quiet. Grandma eased back onto the couch, folded her hands, and looked toward the window. Her face didn't show relief or anger, just stillness. I stood there unsure of what to do with myself. They'll be back, I said. My voice barely carried. Maybe she answered. But this time, we don't have to let them in. I sat with that for a while, the idea of not needing to open the door. For years, I had lived like there was some finish line I hadn't crossed yet, as if with enough effort or success, I could earn my place back in the room. But Grandpa's letter had pulled something loose, like a tight knot finally letting go. I think I need some air, I said. Grandma nodded, and I stepped out onto the back porch. The boards creaked under my steps. Same sound I remembered from summers barefoot, carrying jars of iced tea and asking too many questions. The magnolia trees were blooming again, their branches leaning over the old red dirt field where I'd once tried to build a greenhouse out of PVC pipe and tarp. It collapsed within 2 weeks, but Grandpa had called it a perfect disaster. We laughed about it every summer after that. I walked down to the fence line. The wind was picking up just enough to rustle the tall grass. I stood still and listened. Then I looked out across the fields and realized I wasn't standing in the past anymore. Something had shifted. When I came back inside, Grandma had put a kettle on the stove. She moved slowly but with purpose. You know, she said Walter started planning that research annex 5 years ago, long before he got sick. I looked at her. He never told me. He wanted to, but he was waiting for the right time. He told me he didn't want you to feel like you had to choose between your work and your family. She poured hot water into 2 cups and set one down in front of me. He wanted you to have a place that didn't ask permission, she said. To be who you are. I held the cup, let the warmth settle into my hands. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. That night I stayed in my old room. The wallpaper had faded and the mattress was too soft, but the ceiling still held the glow-in-the-dark stars Grandpa helped me place when I was 9. I'd made him arrange them by constellation. He hadn't even blinked, just got the step stool and followed my instructions. Lying there, I traced them with my eyes and tried to remember the last time I felt this still. In the morning, I made coffee for both of us. The kitchen was quiet, except for the ticking of the clock and the faint rattle of the wind chimes. Grandma folded the newspaper and gave me a look that held more history than words could carry. So she asked, "What now? I think I go see it," I said. "The annex, the lab." She nodded once. He'd like that. The road out to Laurel Creek hadn't changed much. Gravel shoulder clusters of pine telephone lines bending slightly with the weight of years. When I turned down the final stretch, I almost missed it. The building looked like a barn. Long tin roof, wide beams, a pair of tall double doors that could have belonged to a stable. But when I stepped inside, it took my breath. Light poured in from floor-to-ceiling windows along the east wall. Tables stood neatly in rows, each with untouched lab equipment centrifuges, microscopes, a brand-new 3D printer still sealed in plastic. Shelves held boxes labeled with my name in careful handwriting. In the center of the room stood a workbench, and on top of that bench was something I hadn't seen in years, my childhood notebook, the one I thought I'd lost in college. The pages were worn, corners bent, filled with scrawled notes and little diagrams about honeybee communication. I ran my hand over the cover and had to brace myself against the edge of the table. He hadn't just built a lab, he'd built me a home for my mind. Over the next few weeks, I moved into the annex full-time. I called 2 friends from my university days, Tara and Micah, both researchers, who had always believed science should be accessible, not locked behind closed doors. They came with backpacks and questions and more hope than we knew what to do with. We started small, local soil studies, a grant application for micro-irrigation testing, partnerships with nearby farming co-ops. Sometimes we stayed late into the night recalibrating sensors or rewriting failed proposals. Sometimes we just sat on the front steps with coffee and watched the sun drop below the trees. The annex didn't ask us to perform. It didn't care about status or presentation. It gave us space to try to fail and to try again. One night after a grant rejection that hit harder than usual, I stayed behind. The lights were dim, the building quiet. I sat on the floor by the storage closet surrounded by papers and open files. I reached into my bag and pulled out Grandpa's letter, the original copy. I'd asked the lawyer if I could keep it. I unfolded it and read one line again, the one that stuck every time. You wrote your own role. He hadn't meant it as comfort. It was direction. That same night, I started writing something new, a proposal for a youth science program focused on small-town schools. We called it the Little Scientist Initiative. Our first group had just 12 kids. Most of them came from classrooms still using decade-old textbooks. None of them had ever seen a real microscope. We gave each one a leather-bound notebook just like mine with a quote stamped inside the cover. Write the things they don't understand. One day the world will. And standing there watching those kids lean over their experiments with wide eyes and messy notes, I knew this wasn't about replacing what I lost. It was about planting something in better soil and letting it grow. Next time I'll tell you who showed up 3 years later and what happened when I opened the door. 3 years passed before I saw her again. The email came on a Thursday morning. Subject line, request for visit. Claire Whitman, Innovation Annex. The sender was a law office in Charlotte, but the name listed beneath the signature stopped me. Vanessa Whitman. I stared at the screen a while before clicking it open. There was no explanation, just a request to tour the annex at a mutually convenient time and a note that she'd be in Charleston later that month. I didn't reply right away. I wasn't sure what to make of it. I half expected a legal twist, some attempt to reopen the will or dispute a clause, but it didn't read that way. 2 weeks later, she walked through the front doors of the annex. I didn't recognize her at first. No heels, no tailored blazer, no makeup, just a navy coat that looked a little too big, sleeves pulled down past her wrists. She paused near the reception desk and glanced up at the framed portrait of Grandpa that hung above it. She stood there a while, then she turned and looked at me. "He always knew who you were," she said, "even when I didn't, especially when I didn't." I nodded once. She shifted her weight, looked around the space. "I'd like to see it. The lab. What you've done with it." I could have said no. I thought about it. But I didn't. "All right," I said. "Follow me." We walked through the main corridor first. The labs were quiet. Most of the team had already gone home for the day. She kept her hands tucked into her sleeves and stayed a step behind me. "This one's the soil testing lab," I said, pausing at the open doorway. "We partner with local farmers to track nutrient levels and drought resilience." She glanced and nodded, said nothing. Next was the greenhouse wing. Rows of raised beds filled with native plants, some under grow lights, others bathed in natural sun through the glass-paneled roof. She stepped inside, walked slowly along the aisles, stopping here and there to read the tags. "These are all research plots?" she asked. "Mostly. Some are part of the youth program." We kept walking. I showed her the education room, the wall covered in student photos, project posters, sketches of experiments from third graders who'd never held a pipette before. She lingered the longest there. "What's this device?" she asked, pointing to a water sensor near the windowsill. "Measures soil moisture. One of the students designed it last spring. We're testing it in the community garden." We headed outside. The garden was quiet except for the sound of children laughing near the compost bins. A mother knelt beside her son near the lettuce rows, helping him pull weeds. A father tested soil pH with one of our kits. Vanessa stood at the edge of the walkway. Her hands moved again, pulling at her sleeves, then pressing against the wooden railing. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "That's not why I came." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just wanted to see it. What he left you, and what you've built with it. She didn't cry, but her hands didn't stop moving. I let her stay as long as she wanted. She came back the following summer, volunteered for the Little Scientist program. Twice a week, she helped students prepare presentations, taught them how to explain complex ideas in plain English, how to stand tall behind a podium. The kids loved her. Some of them called her Coach V. At the end of the program, she handed me a manila folder. I put together a communication guide. She said, almost sheepish, "For the shy kids. Thought it might help." I took it, read through it later that night. It wasn't perfect, but it was thoughtful, gentle, practical. And for the first time in my life, I saw a version of Vanessa that didn't feel like a performance. We don't talk often, an email here and there, a thank you card last Christmas with a photo of her and the students she worked with. But she shows up, quietly, consistently, and somehow that's enough. We're not sisters the way people usually mean it. There's too much history, too much undone. But in this small corner of a life I never thought I'd have, we've stopped pretending. And in that space between what was taken and what was earned, something honest is beginning to grow. Next time I'll tell you where the work took me and why I carry Grandpa's watch with me every time I speak on a stage. The annex didn't just survive, it grew. What started as one converted barn became a full research campus. 4 labs, 3 greenhouses, 60 acres of trial fields. The work deepened. Our team developed drought-resistant seed varieties for southern farms where traditional crops had started to fail. We shared findings with universities from Kenya to Brazil, and farmers from across the region began visiting Laurel Creek to learn. One morning in April, I flew to San Francisco to accept a national grant for climate innovation. The event was formal. Stage lighting, press photographers, quiet conversations over name tags and espresso. I wore a navy suit and slipped Grandpa's pocket watch into the inner pocket just under the lapel. It still ticked. The initials on the back were fading, but inside the lid was a tiny photo of me at 10 years old standing next to my science fair board, smiling so wide my cheeks almost swallowed my eyes. He'd carried it every day. Grandma told me that the year before she moved into town. That night I flew back east. I didn't open the envelope they handed me on stage until I was home. Inside was a check paperwork and a handwritten note of congratulations from a woman I'd never met. She'd grown up in rural Oklahoma, used one of our soil kits to redesign her family's crop layout, and was now studying environmental science. She'd written, "It gave me permission to take myself seriously." Some days I left the lab door open and sat out back on the steps, listening to the hum of wind through the tall grass. I kept Grandpa's letter inside a drawer at my desk. Every so often I'd reread it, just the one line, "You wrote your own role." The Little Scientist initiative grew too. We worked with school districts that hadn't seen new textbooks in 15 years. Some classrooms had no lab equipment at all, so we brought it to them. We rolled out traveling kits, mobile science labs, seed grants for school gardens, and every student who joined the program received a notebook. Same leather-bound kind, same message stamped inside the cover. Write the things they don't understand. One day, the world will. The kids didn't just fill those pages with answers, they filled them with questions. One of them, a girl named Amber, handed me hers on the final day of the camp. Her handwriting was uneven. The margins were crowded with numbers and arrows and scratch-outs. She'd tracked bee behavior for 3 weeks, noting wing patterns, pollen shifts, and flower timing. "You actually read it?" she asked when I flipped through it. I nodded. "Of course I did." She smiled so wide I forgot what I was going to say next. That was the shift. I didn't need to chase what I'd lost anymore. I was building something forward. At home, Grandma had her own rhythm. She lived in a small apartment connected to my house in town. Her memory softened with time, but her presence stayed strong. We shared morning coffee in the sunroom. She liked to tell stories about Grandpa that never made it into letters or photographs. How he once planted a tree just to propose. How he believed soil remembered kindness. How he knew I'd come back before I did. On clear evenings, I walked to the far end of the fields, past the irrigation test beds and the students' garden plots. At the edge of the property stood an old wooden bench, the one Grandpa built by hand when the annex was still an idea. From there, you could see the stars. Not the glow-in-the-dark ones on my childhood ceiling, but the real ones, the ones you had to slow down to notice. And sometimes when the wind moved just right, I could almost hear him in the trees. Not words, just a feeling, a kind of quiet that let you know you were finally where you belonged. Next time I'll tell you what happened when Vanessa returned one final time and what she brought with her. It was late October when Vanessa came back. The sky had that early fall weight to it. Heavy clouds, no rain yet. Just that feeling something was about to shift. I was in the annex greenhouse checking irrigation data when the receptionist radioed in. Said there was someone here asking for me by name. When I stepped into the front lobby, she was already standing by the glass wall near Grandpa's portrait. Her coat was different this time, dark gray wool. She wore a scarf, but no makeup, no effort to soften her presence. She turned when she heard my footsteps. "I'm not here to stay long," she said. "I just wanted to bring you something." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder thicker than the one she'd given me the year before. She held it out, both hands flat beneath it. "I've been working on a training guide," she said, "something the students can use if they want to present their research outside the program. Public speaking, grant writing basics, the things no one teaches until it's too late." I took it from her hands. "There's a section on conflict resolution," she added a little quieter. I figured some of them might need that too. We stood there for a moment, not really looking at each other, just sharing the same space. "You didn't have to come in person," I said. "I know." There was a long pause. "Last month, she said I spoke at a school in Knoxville. They're trying to start their own version of the Little Scientist program, smaller scale, but they asked me to talk about how you built this place." I didn't say anything, just waited. "I told them I didn't build it," she said. "I told them I almost ruined it. But that watching you run it, watching you teach kids the way no one taught us, changed how I see everything." She glanced at the portrait again. "I don't know what he saw in me," she said, "but I'm starting to understand what he saw in you." She stepped back from the wall and adjusted her scarf. "I should go," she said, "but thank you for letting me help, even if I didn't deserve it." As she turned to leave, I spoke before I really thought it through. "Vanessa." She stopped. "You didn't get everything you were promised," I said, "but neither did I. We both lost something." She didn't nod. She didn't speak. She just gave a small, steady look, then walked out the door. That winter, we added a new module to the student program. Presentation practice funding strategies, how to pitch ideas clearly in rooms that didn't always listen the first time. We used parts of her guide, edited, expanded, reorganized, but the bones were hers. At the end of the workbook, we included a short acknowledgement, adapted from materials provided by V. Whitman Program Volunteer. She didn't ask for it. She didn't comment on it when she saw it, but I watched her the first time she read it on the back cover of a student's binder. She smiled. Not big, not performative, just long enough to mean something. We didn't talk often, but she kept showing up. 2 summers in a row, then fall semester orientation. She came to the Harvest Fair in September, helped set up the booth, stood quietly behind the student exhibits while they explained soil testing protocols to local farmers. That day, one of the parents walked up to me. "Your sister?" she asked. I paused. "She helps with the program," I said. The woman nodded. "She's good with the nervous ones. They really listen when she talks." I glanced across the yard and saw Vanessa kneeling beside a third-grade student, helping her arrange sample slides without breaking the covers. That night, I walked to the bench again. The stars were out, the real ones. I thought of the girl I used to be, the one who stood in empty hallways waiting for a door to open that never did. And I thought of the girl who now held that door open for someone else. Even if it had taken years, even if it hadn't started in love, it had turned into something close. Next time, I'll tell you how the story ends and the legacy he left behind that still guides us today. The seasons moved through the annex like they always had, steady, unhurried. Spring brought students planting their first seeds, summer filled the labs with sunlight, and the hum of experiments, and fall brought harvest displays lined with notebooks, laughter, and questions that still didn't have answers. We kept growing. The work deepened. Our research reached places I'd only dreamed of: rural farming networks in South Texas, partner schools in North Carolina, translated lesson guides in 3 languages. But no matter how far the ideas traveled, everything still pointed back to that wooden bench at the edge of the field, and to the man who built it. Grandma turned 91 that winter. She still lived in the apartment connected to my home in town. Mornings were slower now, conversations softer. But she always asked about the students, always checked the paper for weather updates in Laurel Creek. Some mornings, when the sun came through just right, I'd find her sitting by the window with one of Grandpa's old notebooks open in her lap. "You're doing exactly what he hoped for," she said once, not looking up. "But more than that, you made it your own." I nodded. Some truths don't need to be spoken out loud more than once. I never heard from my parents again. Their names showed up now and then in forwarded estate notices, in donation lists I didn't subscribe to. But there was no contact, no apology. And strangely, I stopped needing one. There was nothing left in me that waited to be chosen. That part had gone quiet. The annex, though, that kept speaking. I remember one afternoon, early summer, the first real heat rising off the ground, when one of the little scientist students, a girl named Kelsey, brought me her final project. It was a soil composition analysis wrapped in hand-colored charts and a full-page conclusion in pencil. She held it out with both hands. "Nervous?" "Is it okay?" she asked. I flipped through the pages slowly, pausing where she had underlined her findings. "It's more than okay," I said. Her shoulders relaxed. "My brother said it was weird," she mumbled. "That nobody cares about dirt." I smiled, handed the binder back. "Well, I said this place was built by someone who believed even dirt remembers things. So I think you're right on track." She tucked the notebook under her arm and grinned as she ran back down the hallway. That's when it struck me, legacy doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to come with applause or recognition. Sometimes it shows up in moments like that, quiet, sincere, unexpected. A girl with dust on her hands and a mind full of questions, standing a little taller because someone told her it mattered. And now, years later, I finally understand what Grandpa left behind. It wasn't just property or patents or money in an account. It was a map, a way forward, built from kindness, attention, and the steady belief that when you plant something with care, even in broken soil, it can grow into something strong. And maybe that's the lesson. We don't always get justice the way we imagined it. Sometimes it doesn't come with revenge or vindication or the words we hoped someone would finally say, but it can come in the form of peace, of purpose, of no longer having to explain who you are just to be treated like you belong. That's enough. And sometimes it's everything. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone, or made you think about where you came from, feel free to share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you ever felt invisible, just know the right people will see you. You don't have to shout, just keep showing up.